The Mortal Kombat sequel that finally gets it right. A deep dive into why Mortal Kombat 2 delivers what fans actually wanted. Now, eventually, you do plan to have a Mortal Kombat tournament in your movie about the Mortal Kombat tournament, right? It's the question that was on everybody's mind watching 2021's Mortal Kombat, a live-action film adaptation of the Touchstone fantasy fighting video game property that makes the bold choice of not actually including the franchise's namesake martial arts competition. Rest assured, though, this year's Mortal Kombat 2 doesn't repeat that mistake. In fact, judging by the first wave of reactions from critics, the sequel makes it a point of doing just about everything differently from its predecessor. The absence of the actual tournament in the 2021 film was more than just a minor oversight, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of what draws audiences to the Mortal Kombat franchise in the first place. For over 3 decades, since the original arcade game debuted in 1992, the concept of the tournament has been absolutely central to the mythology. It's not just a backdrop, it's the very foundation upon which the entire narrative structure rests. The tournament represents the ultimate clash between Earthrealm and Outworld, a mystical competition where the fate of entire dimensions hangs in the balance. To make a Mortal Kombat movie without the tournament is akin to making a Star Wars film without the Force, or a James Bond movie without espionage. It strips away the essential DNA that makes the property what it is. The decision to omit the tournament from the first film seemed to stem from a misguided attempt to modernize or ground the story, as if the fantastical elements needed to be eased into gradually. This approach fundamentally misread the audience's appetite for the material. Mortal Kombat fans don't come to these films for subtle, realistic character studies. They come for the spectacle, the mythology, the over-the-top violence, and yes, the tournament itself. The video games have always embraced their inherent absurdity with pride, featuring characters who can rip out spines, against the current of what makes it appealing. Directed by Mortal Kombat 2021 Helmer Simon McCoy, albeit this time drawing from a script credited to Jeremy Slater, who developed the Umbrella Academy TV series and created Marvel's Moon Knight TV show. Mortal Kombat 2 shifts its focus away from the previous movie's lead, no-name mixed martial arts fighter Cole Young Lewis Tan, to Hollywood superstar and longtime fan-favorite character Johnny Cage, as played by real-life fan-favorite actor Karl Urban. And if the prospect of swapping out the milquetoast Young, with no disrespect to Tan, a talented martial arts aficionado who deserves better, for a much more colorful protagonist like Cage reads as an immediate upgrade, that's pretty much exactly how it plays out, apparently. The Cole Young character represented one of the first film's most significant creative missteps. In a franchise overflowing with iconic, instantly recognizable characters, from the Thunder God Raiden to the ice-wielding Sub-Zero, from the revenge-driven Scorpion to the four-armed monster Goro, the decision to create an entirely new protagonist seemed almost deliberately perverse. Young wasn't just a bland character, he was aggressively uninteresting, lacking the personality, visual flair, or compelling motivation that defines the best Mortal Kombat fighters. His special power, mysterious, arcana, that manifested as some sort of body armor, felt generic and uninspired compared to the creative and violent abilities that make the game so memorable. Lewis Tan, to his credit, did everything he could with the material he was given. A genuinely talented martial artist and actor who has demonstrated charisma and skill in other projects, Tan was saddled with a character that seemed designed by committee to be as inoffensive and unremarkable as possible. The thinking seemed to be that audiences needed a relatable entry point into this fantastical world, someone normal who could discover the strange universe of Mortal Kombat alongside the viewer. But this fundamentally misunderstood what audiences want from these films. Nobody watches Mortal Kombat to see themselves, they watch to see larger-than-life characters doing impossible things in spectacular fashion. Enter Johnny Cage, and more specifically, Karl Urban's interpretation of the character. Cage has been a fan favorite since his introduction in the original game, a Hollywood action star whose cocky personality and sunglasses-wearing swagger provide a perfect counterbalance to the grim seriousness of characters like Scorpion and Sub-Zero. He's essentially the franchise's comic relief, but in the best possible way. His humor comes from his unshakable confidence and his refusal to take the supernatural chaos around him seriously, even as he proves himself a formidable fighter. The character provides natural opportunities for levity and self-awareness without undercutting the stakes or the spectacle. Karl Urban brings to the role not just his considerable acting chops and action credibility honed through projects like The Boys, Star Trek, and Dread, but also his genuine enthusiasm for the source material. Urban is a well-documented fan of genre properties, someone who understands and respects the material he's adapting rather than viewing it as something that needs to be elevated or legitimized. His approach to characters has always been to find what makes them work in their original medium and translate that effectively to screen, rather than reinventing them to suit some preconceived notion of what a serious film should look like. The choice of Jeremy Smee demonstrated his ability to balance outrageous comic book concepts with genuine emotional stakes and character development. His creation of Moon Knight for Marvel showed he could handle mythology-heavy material that embraces the weird and supernatural without drowning in exposition or becoming incomprehensible. Both projects required juggling ensemble casts of colorful characters, managing complex mythologies, and delivering both spectacular action and meaningful character moments, precisely the skills required for a successful Mortal Kombat adaptation. Indeed, Films' Bill Bria sums up the initial consensus for Mortal Kombat 2 nicely with his post on Twitter X, calling it the movie to best capture the full spirit of the games so far, and writing that Urban's Cage is a savvy ode to 90s action stars. He also described Adeline Rudolph's Katana as the coolest heroine in the franchise, which is a somewhat surprising but certainly welcome common refrain among the first wave of social media reactions to the film. The praise for capturing the full spirit of the games cannot be understated in its significance. Previous Mortal Kombat adaptations have struggled to find the right tone, either taking themselves too seriously and becoming unintentionally silly like the 1995 film's more somber moments, or not taking themselves seriously enough and becoming campy exercises in self-parody like Mortal Kombat, Annihilation. The games themselves have always walked a fascinating tightrope, presenting their violent spectacle with complete seriousness while simultaneously winking at the audience about how ridiculous it all is. Finding that balance in a live-action film has proven remarkably difficult. The description of Urban's Johnny Cage as a savvy ode to 90s action stars is particularly telling. The character has always been something of a meta-commentary on the action heroes of that era, the muscle-bound, one-liner spouting protagonists of the Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Van Damme vehicles that dominated action cinema. By making that subtext text and having Urban play into the archetype while also commenting on it, the film seems to have found a way to have its cake and eat it too, delivering both the thrills of classic action cinema and a knowing awareness of its own tropes. The repeated mentions of Adeline Rudolph's Katana as a standout element represents perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the early reactions. Katana is a complex character in the game mythology, a princess of Outworld raised by the evil emperor Shao Kahn, who eventually discovers her true heritage and rebels against her adoptive father. Her story combines elements of political intrigue, family drama, and personal identity crisis, all wrapped in the package of an expert assassin who wields razor-sharp steel fans as weapons. It's rich material, but previous adaptations have reduced her to little more than eye candy or a generic love interest. That critics are specifically citing Katana as the heart of the film and the coolest heroine in the franchise suggests that the sequel has finally done justice to the character's potential. Giving her the emotional center of the story indicates that the filmmakers understand you can have spectacular action and genuine character development simultaneously, they're not mutually exclusive elements. The best action films have always understood this, grounding their set pieces in character motivation and emotional stakes that make audiences care about the outcomes beyond just the visceral thrills. Besides lacking the titular event, 2021's Mortal Kombat makes the confounding decision to cast several skilled martial artists, only to saddle them with choppy action scenes that render the film's would-be mesmerizing fight choreography almost incomprehensible. Thankfully, it appears that's another faux pas that Mortal Kombat 2 corrects. As journalist Brandon Davis put it on Twitter X, the sequel feels more confident and comfortable embracing its video game roots to huge benefit. He added that it's a fun, fast-paced, ridiculous bloodbath with great action, and once again cited Katana as the heart of the film. The action cinematography of the 2021 film represented a particularly frustrating failure because the ingredients for success were all present. The cast included genuinely talented martial artists like Joe Taslim, who played Sub-Zero and brought legitimate silat expertise to the role, and Hiroyuki Sanada, a veteran of countless action films who portrayed Scorpion. The fight choreography itself was reportedly quite impressive in its initial form. But through some combination of frantic editing, poor camera placement, and an apparent belief that shaky cam confusion equals intensity, the final product rendered much of this work nearly unwatchable. This approach to action filmmaking has plagued the genre for years, a misguided aesthetic choice that seems to assume audiences can't handle clearly photographed action and need to be disoriented into feeling like the fights are more intense than they actually are. It's the exact opposite of what makes great martial arts cinema work. The best fight scenes, from classic Jackie Chan films to the John Wick series to recent achievements like Everything, Everywhere All at Once, are shot and edited with clarity, allowing audiences to appreciate the skill and choreography on display. When you have talented performers capable of impressive physical feats, you want to actually show those feats, not hide them behind editorial chaos. The description of Mortal Kombat 2 as being more confident and comfortable embracing its video game roots suggests the filmmakers have learned this lesson. Video games, particularly fighting games, are all about clarity. Players need to see exactly what's happening to understand the action and respond accordingly. The spectacular fatalities that define Mortal Kombat work because they're clearly presented, allowing players to appreciate both their creativity and their shocking violence. A film adaptation should follow the same principle, presenting its action with enough clarity that audiences can appreciate both the choreography and the spectacular effects. The phrase, "ridiculous bloodbath," is particularly encouraging because it suggests the film isn't shying away from the franchise's signature gore. The Mortal Kombat games have always pushed boundaries with their violence, turning the act of finishing off an opponent into an art form of creative brutality. Watering this down or trying to make it tasteful would be antithetical to the franchise's identity. The violence needs to be over the top, shocking, and yes, ridiculous, because that's part of the appeal. It's so excessive that it transcends being disturbing and becomes a form of dark comedy, a cartoonish ultraviolence that's more about creativity than genuine horror. Comic book. Com's Chris Killian echoed that sentiment, writing that the movie has better fights, cooler costumes, and nastier fatalities. Elsewhere, digital creator, Blu-ray Angel, wrote that the sequel is an immense upgrade from the first movie, and agreed that Katana was a smart choice to have as the heart of the film. By comparison, seasoned reporter Germain Lucier was a bit more measured in his praise, writing that Mortal Kombat 2 has a bare-bones story but it works, while podcaster Shabazz felt that the movie pulls its punches when it matters most, but still gets by thanks to its pure arcade energy. The mention of cooler costumes addresses another area where the first film disappointed longtime fans. Mortal Kombat characters have iconic, instantly recognizable designs: Sub-Zero's blue ninja outfit, Scorpion's yellow counterpart, Raiden's distinctive hat and white robes, Katana's purple and blue fighting gear. The 2021 film attempted to modernize many of these designs, often resulting in generic tactical gear that stripped away the visual distinctiveness that makes these characters pop. It was another example of filmmakers being embarrassed by the source material, afraid that faithful adaptations of the game designs would look silly on screen. But faithfulness to character design isn't about slavish recreation, it's about understanding what makes a design work and translating that effectively to a new medium. The best superhero films have figured this out, finding ways to adapt comic book costumes that maintain their essential character while working in live action. When done well, these iconic designs become a strength rather than an embarrassment, giving characters a larger-than-life quality that enhances the spectacle. The fact that critics are specifically praising the sequel's costumes suggests the filmmakers have embraced this approach, giving audiences the visual feast they expect from a Mortal Kombat adaptation. The praise for nastier fatalities directly addresses one of the franchise's most distinctive elements. Fatalities, the elaborate, excessively violent finishing moves that Players can perform at the end of matches, have been the series' calling card since the beginning. They're simultaneously shocking, creative, and darkly humorous, pushing the boundaries of taste in ways that have generated controversy and publicity in equal measure. A Mortal Kombat film needs to deliver fatalities that capture this spirit, and it sounds like the sequel has risen to the challenge. The more measured reactions are worth noting as well, because they provide a fuller picture of what the film offers. Germain Lucier's observation that the movie has a bare-bones story but it works, suggests that the filmmakers have wisely chosen not to overcomplicate the narrative. Mortal Kombat doesn't need an intricate plot with multiple twists and complex political machinations, it needs a solid framework on which to hang spectacular action sequences. The tournament itself provides that framework. Fighting would just get in the way of what audiences actually want to see. The criticism that the movie pulls its punches when it matters most is more concerning, suggesting there might be moments where the film backs away from fully committing to its premise. This could mean anything from toning down violence at crucial moments to shying away from fully embracing the mythology's more outlandish elements. However, the qualifier that it still succeeds thanks to pure arcade energy implies that even if the film occasionally hedges its bets, it generally maintains the rapid-fire pacing and spectacle-driven approach that defines the games. Between the improved action, the unexpectedly satisfying story for Katana, which critic Hunter Bolding was similarly struck by, and, again, the actual Mortal Kombat tournament being part of the plot this time around, it's clear now why Warner Bros. Decided that Mortal Kombat 2 was good enough to warrant a prime summer movie season release. The decision to give Mortal Kombat 2 a coveted summer release slot speaks volumes about the studio's confidence in the product. Summer is when studios release their most commercial offerings, films expected to draw large audiences and generate significant revenue. It's a competitive landscape filled with major franchise entries and big-budget spectacles. For Warner Bros. To position Mortal Kombat 2 in this environment indicates they believe the film can compete with other major releases and justify the marketing expenditure that comes with a wide summer release. This stands in contrast to the first film's release strategy, which was complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic but still reflected a certain hedging of bets. Released simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max in April 2021, the film's positioning suggested the studio wasn't entirely confident it could stand as a theatrical-only event. While the pandemic certainly influenced this decision, the simultaneous streaming release provided a safety net, ensuring the film would find an audience even if theatrical business remained depressed. The summer 2024 release for the sequel indicates that Warner Bros. Believes they have a genuine crowd pleaser on their hands, a film that will benefit from the theatrical experience and justify audiences making the trip to cinemas. This confidence seems well-founded based on the early reactions, which consistently praise the film's improved action cinematography and spectacle. These are elements that play best on a large screen with theatrical sound, creating an experience that streaming simply can't replicate. The franchise's journey from the controversial 1990s films through the wilderness years to the 2021 reboot and now this sequel mirrors the broader evolution of video game adaptations in Hollywood. For decades, video game movies were considered a creative dead end, films that studios made cynically to cash in on recognizable brands while having little respect for the source material or its fans. The results were usually disasters both critically and commercially, confirming Hollywood's prejudices about games being unadaptable. But the landscape has shifted dramatically in recent years. Films like Sonic the Hedgehog, Detective Pikachu, and the Sonic sequel have shown that video game adaptations can succeed when filmmakers actually respect the source material and understand what fans want to see. Television has seen even more success, with series like The Last of Us, Fallout, and Arcane, earning both critical acclaim and massive audiences. The key in all these cases has been treating the games as valuable creative works with interesting characters, compelling worlds, and stories worth telling, rather than empty brands to be exploited. Mortal Kombat 2 appears to represent the franchise's full embrace of this more respectful approach. Instead of being embarrassed by the game's excess and trying to tone it down or modernize it beyond recognition, the sequel seems to lean into what makes Mortal Kombat distinctive. It understands that fans don't need the material to be legitimized or elevated, they need it to be faithfully adapted with skill and enthusiasm. They want to see the tournament, the fatalities, the iconic characters, and the over-the-top mythology brought to life with the production values that modern filmmaking can provide. The repeated emphasis on the film feeling more like the game suggests the sequel has successfully translated the essential experience of playing Mortal Kombat into a cinematic form. This doesn't mean mimicking game mechanics or structure. Direct translations of gameplay to screen rarely work. Rather, it means capturing the spirit, the energy, the excitement that makes people want to play the games in the first place. It's about understanding that the games are power fantasies wrapped in spectacular violence and Asian-influenced mysticism, delivered with a knowing wink that acknowledges the absurdity while never undercutting the entertainment value. The focus on Kitana's character arc also suggests the filmmakers understand that embracing the video game roots doesn't mean abandoning character development or emotional storytelling. The best games in the Mortal Kombat series have always included surprisingly deep lore and character backgrounds. While the core gameplay is about fighting, the mythology surrounding these characters, their relationships, their histories, their motivations, adds depth and meaning to the matches. Kitana's story in particular has always been one of the franchise's richest, dealing with themes of identity, loyalty, and finding one's true purpose. By making her the emotional center of the film, the sequel seems to have found the sweet spot between spectacle and substance. Audiences get the violent action and visual effects they expect, but they're also given a character to root for, someone whose journey provides context and stakes for all the mayhem. This is crucial for making the action matter. Without characters we care about, even the most spectacular fight scenes become empty exercises in choreography and special effects. Looking at the broader context of the Mortal Kombat franchise, the sequel's apparent success represents a validation of the property's enduring appeal. Mortal Kombat has remained relevant for over 3 decades, spawning numerous sequels, spin-offs, comics, animated films, and previous live-action adaptations. The brand has survived controversies, including being specifically cited during congressional hearings about video game violence that led to the creation of the ESRB rating system. It's outlasted countless competitors and pretenders, maintaining its position as one of the most recognizable fighting game franchises in the world. This longevity isn't accidental, it's a result of the core concept being fundamentally sound and the developers consistently understanding what makes the property special. NetherRealm Studios, the current stewards of the franchise, have shown a remarkable ability to evolve the games while maintaining their essential character. Each new entry brings updated graphics, refined gameplay, and new characters, but the core appeal remains constant: spectacular one-on-one combat with larger-than-life characters, wrapped in mythology that takes itself seriously even as it acknowledges its own ridiculousness. A successful film adaptation needs to follow this same model, and Mortal Kombat 2 appears to have done exactly that. It's updated the approach of the 2021 film, learning from that movie's mistakes while building on its strengths. It's embraced modern action filmmaking techniques while avoiding the pitfalls that made the first film's action hard to follow. It's given audiences the tournament they expected, the characters they love, and the spectacle they crave, all while apparently telling a story that provides genuine emotional engagement. The coming weeks will reveal whether this early positive buzz translates into commercial success and sustained critical approval. But the initial reactions suggest that after years of failed attempts and false starts, the Mortal Kombat franchise has finally gotten the live-action adaptation it deserves. A film that understands its source material, respects its audience, and delivers the violent, spectacular, ridiculous entertainment that fans have been waiting for all along. And this time, it actually includes the tournament. Mortal Kombat 2, why this sequel could finally deliver the definitive adaptation fans have been waiting decades for. I have high hopes that Mortal Kombat 2 will be amazing. As a longtime Mortal Kombat fan, I was excited when the 2021 film was released and rebooted the long-dormant movie franchise. Unfortunately, the 2021 film was quite underwhelming and didn't even feel like a proper Mortal Kombat movie at times. Thankfully, the ending of 2021's Mortal Kombat perfectly sets up a sequel story that is much more exciting. As is teased at the end of the first movie, the characters will compete in an actual Mortal Kombat tournament in the sequel. My journey as a Mortal Kombat fan began in the early 1990s, when the original arcade game revolutionized the fighting game genre with its digitized graphics, brutal fatalities, and mysterious Eastern-influenced mythology. Over the decades, I've played virtually every entry in the series, from the classic 2D fighters to the 3D-era games and the modern Earthrealm Studios entries. I've invested countless hours mastering combos, learning character movesets, and exploring the increasingly complex lore that underpins this fantastical universe. Like many fans of my generation, Mortal Kombat isn't just a game franchise, it's a foundational part of my gaming identity. When Warner Bros. Announced they were rebooting the film franchise after years of dormancy, my excitement was tempered by cautious optimism. The previous live-action films had their moments but ultimately failed to capture what makes Mortal Kombat special. The 1995 film was fun but painfully dated and limited by its PG-13 rating. Annihilation was a disaster that nearly killed the franchise's cinematic potential entirely. Could a modern adaptation finally do justice to the property? The involvement of producer James Wan, director Simon McQuoid, and a talented cast including international action stars suggested this reboot might be different. The reality, however, was profoundly disappointing. The 2021 film made baffling creative decisions that suggested a fundamental misunderstanding of what Mortal Kombat is supposed to be. The absence of the tournament itself, the literal namesake of the franchise, was shocking. It's as if the filmmakers were embarrassed by the source material and wanted to distance themselves from what they perceived as silly video game tropes. Instead of embracing the tournament structure that has defined the games for 3 decades, they created a convoluted plot about pre-tournament assassinations that completely missed the point. The film's treatment of its characters was equally frustrating. Rather than focusing on beloved, established characters from the games, the movie centered on Cole Young, an original creation with no connection to Mortal Kombat canon. While I understand the impulse to create an audience surrogate character who discovers this world alongside viewers, the execution was deeply flawed. Cole was bland, his motivations were unclear, and his special abilities, some sort of golden armor, felt generic compared to the creative powers of established characters like Sub-Zero's ice manipulation or Scorpion's hellfire. What made this decision particularly galling was that the film had access to an entire roster of fascinating, visually distinctive, personality-rich characters from the games. Johnny Cage, the Hollywood action star with supernatural fighting abilities. Kitana, the conflicted princess of Outworld. Kung Lao, the razor-hatted warrior carrying on his ancestors' legacy. Any of these characters could have served as the protagonist while also delivering the iconography and personality that fans expect. Instead, we got a character who felt like he belonged in a generic martial arts film rather than Mortal Kombat specifically. The action sequences, which should have been the film's primary strength, were marred by choppy editing and poor cinematography that made it difficult to appreciate the choreography. When you cast talented martial artists like Joe Taslim and Hiroyuki Sanada, you want to actually see them fight, not watch a blur of rapid cuts that obscure their skills. The violence, while present, often felt gratuitous rather than creative. The game's fatalities are over-the-top spectacles of dark imagination, but the film's gore felt empty and perfunctory. Despite all these problems, the film's ending offered a glimmer of hope. The setup for a sequel directly addressed the biggest complaint. This time, there would be an actual tournament. The final scene showed our heroes preparing to recruit fighters for the upcoming competition, with explicit mentions of Johnny Cage and other fan-favorite characters. It was an acknowledgement, however implicit, that the filmmakers understood they had missed the mark and needed to course-correct for the sequel. This promise of a proper Mortal Kombat tournament gave me hope that the franchise could still be salvaged. Since it will feature an actual tournament, fan-favorite characters like Johnny Cage, Shao Kahn, Kitana, Baraka, and many more will be introduced in the upcoming Mortal Kombat 2. The story of the sequel will be even more high stakes than that of the first movie, since Shao Kahn, Emperor of Outworld, will be able to invade Earthrealm if he is victorious in the tournament. Overall, it seems like Mortal Kombat 2 will more closely adapt the ambitious story of the video games, which is something I've been waiting my whole life to see. The addition of Johnny Cage alone represents a massive improvement in understanding what makes Mortal Kombat work. Cage has been a fan favorite since the original game, providing essential comic relief and meta-commentary within the franchise's otherwise grim supernatural mythology. He's a character who allows the story to acknowledge its own absurdity without undercutting the stakes or spectacle. His journey from arrogant Hollywood pretty boy to genuine hero who proves his worth against mystical warriors has always been one of the franchise's most satisfying character arcs. The casting of Karl, an actor who consistently demonstrates both action credibility and an understanding of genre material, suggests the filmmakers finally grasp what this character should be. Shao Kahn's introduction as the primary antagonist is equally significant. One of gaming's most iconic villains, Shao Kahn is the epitome of a larger-than-life threat, a conquering emperor whose very voice shakes the arena, whose presence commands absolute terror. His design, with the distinctive horned helmet and massive frame, is instantly recognizable. His role in the game's mythology as the tournament's final boss, the ultimate challenge that players must overcome, makes him the perfect antagonist for a film actually featuring the tournament. If the sequel can successfully bring Shao Kahn to life with the appropriate level of menace and spectacle, it will deliver one of the franchise's most essential elements that previous films never quite managed. Kitana's inclusion is perhaps most intriguing from a storytelling perspective. Her character embodies the kind of complex narrative that Mortal Kombat's mythology can support when given proper attention. Raised as Shao Kahn's daughter and trained as an elite assassin, she eventually discovers she's actually the princess of Edenia, a realm Shao Kahn conquered, and that her father murdered her real parents. Her journey from loyal servant to rebel against tyranny provides genuine emotional depth and character development opportunities. Early reactions praising her as the heart of the film suggest the sequel has successfully translated this complexity to screen. Baraka and the other new additions represent the franchise's rich variety of character designs and fighting styles. Baraka, with his grotesque arm blades and savage fighting style, embodies Mortal Kombat's horror elements. Including characters like him signals that the sequel isn't shying away from the franchise's darker, more monstrous aspects. The games have always featured a menagerie of bizarre warriors, cyborgs, sorcerers, gods, demons, and everything in between, and populating the tournament with this variety is essential to capturing the feel of the source material. The stakes of the tournament, with Outworld's invasion of Earthrealm hanging in the balance, directly adapt the central conflict of the early games. This is the mythology that hooked millions of players, the idea that these one-on-one fights aren't just personal contests but cosmic struggles with the fate of entire worlds at stake. It transforms what could be simple tournament brackets into an apocalyptic scenario where every match matters. This is the kind of high-concept storytelling that should elevate Mortal Kombat above generic martial arts films, making it something grander and more mythologically significant. What excites me most is the promise that Mortal Kombat 2 will more closely adapt the ambitious story of the video games. The modern Mortal Kombat games, particularly the NetherRealm Studios entries, have featured surprisingly sophisticated narratives. While the core gameplay remains fighting, the story modes have woven intricate tales of time travel, alternate dimensions, family drama, political intrigue, and cosmic conflicts. These aren't just excuses for fights, they're genuinely engaging narratives that give context and meaning to the combat. A film that takes these stories seriously, rather than treating them as silly video game nonsense, could deliver something special. Throughout my life as a gamer and film fan, I've watched video game adaptations slowly improve. For decades, they were almost universally terrible, suggesting that games were somehow unadaptable to cinema. But recent successes have proven that wrong. Sonic the Hedgehog worked because it understood the character and what fans wanted to see. The Last of Us succeeded by treating. Mortal Kombat 2 appears to represent the franchise's full embrace of this respectful approach. Instead of trying to elevate or ground the material, stripping away what makes it distinctive in a misguided attempt at legitimacy, the sequel seems to lean into the franchise's essential characteristics. It's giving us the tournament, the iconic characters, the mythology, and presumably the creative violence that defines the series. This is what I've been waiting my whole life to see, a Mortal Kombat adaptation made by people who understand why fans love this franchise. Mortal Kombat fans are loving early screenings of Mortal Kombat 2. While the 2021 film underwhelmed longtime fans of Mortal Kombat, as well as people who were new to the franchise, test audiences are reportedly loving the upcoming sequel. In a recent interview, Mortal Kombat 2 writer Jeremy Slater claimed that there have been several test screenings for the sequel that have garnered extremely positive reactions from fans. According to Slater, fans love Mortal Kombat 2 and even compared the test screening reactions to his own experience watching Avengers: Endgame. Read his full comment below. I'm so excited for people to see the movie. It's been done for a while. We've been waiting for the right release date and waiting for the right window. I have been to those test screenings, which are full of Mortal Kombat fans, and watching them react to it the way I reacted to Avengers: Endgame. They were cheering and jumping out of their seats. Every joke is landing and they are loving it. It's one of the greatest moments of my life. That's why you get into this business. This comparison to Avengers: Endgame is particularly telling and exciting. Endgame represented the culmination of over a decade of careful storytelling, character development, and fan service in the best possible sense of that term. It was a film that understood what its audience wanted and delivered that experience with confidence and skill. The audience reactions weren't manufactured or forced, they were genuine expressions of excitement from people seeing beloved characters and storylines brought to satisfying conclusions. For Slater to compare Mortal Kombat 2's test screening reactions to that experience suggests the sequel has achieved something similar within its own context. It's delivering the moments fans have been waiting for, the tournament itself, the character matchups we've imagined, the fatalities executed with proper spectacle, the mythology respected and expanded. When long-suffering fans finally see these elements executed well, their enthusiasm would naturally mirror the kind of passionate response that Endgame generated. The fact that these screenings were full of Mortal Kombat fans is crucial. These aren't general test audiences or random moviegoers, they're people with deep knowledge of an investment in the franchise. They're the hardest audience to please because they have specific expectations and can immediately identify when something feels wrong or inauthentic. That these hardcore fans are reportedly cheering and jumping out of their seats suggests the sequel has successfully threaded the needle of delivering what fans want while also working as an entertaining film for broader audiences. Slater's mention that every joke is landing addresses another concern from the first film. Comedy in Mortal Kombat is tricky. The franchise takes its mythology seriously while also acknowledging the inherent absurdity of its premise. Finding the right balance, where humor enhances rather than undercuts the experience, requires a delicate touch. The fact that the comedy is working suggests the sequel has found that balance, likely thanks in large part to Johnny Cage's inclusion. His character naturally provides opportunities for humor that feels organic rather than forced, commenting on the chaos around him without making everything feel like a joke. The writer describing these screenings as one of the greatest moments of my life, and why you get into this business, speaks to the passion behind the project. Slater clearly cares about this material and wants to deliver something that honors the franchise while also working as quality cinema. His credits, developing The Umbrella Academy and creating Moon Knight, demonstrate his ability to handle ensemble casts, mythology-heavy storytelling, and material that balances serious themes with spectacular action. That he's personally invested in the fan reaction suggests he approached Mortal Kombat 2 as more than just another assignment. Based on Slater's comments, it seems like Mortal Kombat 2 is going to be an amazing theater experience. While Mortal Kombat 2's writer is obviously not gonna say anything bad about the film he wrote, this kind of reception is exactly what the franchise needs after the underwhelming 2021 film. Therefore, I'm hopeful that the sequel will address all the problems with the first movie and will be a much more entertaining experience overall. I'm well aware that filmmakers promoting their own work will naturally emphasize the positive and downplay any concerns. Slater isn't going to tell interviewers that test screenings went poorly or that fans hated major elements of the film. There's an inherent grain of salt we must take with any creator's promotional comments. However, there are degrees of enthusiasm, and Slater's comments read as genuinely excited rather than perfunctory. The specific details, the comparison to Endgame, the description of fan reactions, the personal emotional investment, suggest authentic enthusiasm rather than hollow marketing speak. Moreover, test screening reactions, while not infallible predictors of final quality or commercial success, do provide valuable data points. Films that test poorly with their target demographic rarely improve significantly between those screenings and final release. Conversely, films that generate genuine enthusiasm from test audiences often maintain that quality through to the theatrical version. The fact that Mortal Kombat fans specifically are responding so positively suggests the sequel has course-corrected from the first film's mistakes. The theatrical experience aspect is particularly important for a franchise like Mortal Kombat. These films are designed to be spectacles, with large-scale action sequences, elaborate special effects, and impactful sound design. While streaming has its place, certain movies simply work better in theaters, where the scale and impact of the presentation can be fully appreciated. The sequel's summer theatrical release suggests Warner Bros. Shares this understanding and believes they have a film worthy of that presentation. What gives me the most hope is that the sequel's production team appears to have actually listened to criticism of the first film and made meaningful changes rather than doubling down on failed approaches. The inclusion of the tournament, the focus on established characters rather than original creations, the emphasis on clarity in action sequences, these all directly address major complaints about the 2021 film. This responsiveness suggests a franchise that might actually improve with each installment rather than repeating the same mistakes. There were many problems with the first movie in the rebooted franchise, but the main issue was that it didn't include an actual Mortal Kombat tournament. Instead of including a tournament, which is the focus of most of the games, the 2021 film follows Shang Tsung and his chosen Outworld warriors as they try to kill Earthrealm's fighters before the tournament. Additionally, the first film mostly follows Cole Young, a character that was created for the movie and has never appeared in any Mortal Kombat games. Obviously, these story decisions disappointed many fans of the franchise. It's currently unclear whether Cole Young will still be the main character in Mortal Kombat 2, but it seems like the sequel is at least fixing the other problems with the first movie. The decision to have Shang Tsung attempt to kill Earthrealm's fighters before the tournament, while providing action set pieces, fundamentally misunderstood the appeal of the source material. Part of what makes Mortal Kombat's mythology compelling is the structure and rules of the tournament itself. These aren't random street fights or assassination attempts, they're formalized combat governed by ancient mystical law. Fighters are chosen, stakes are established, and the tournament proceeds according to specific regulations. This structure provides narrative framework and raises the stakes beyond mere physical combat. The games have always understood this appeal. Even as the series has evolved and expanded its mythology, the tournament remains central to the franchise's identity. The character select screen, the bracket structure, the one-on-one format, the arena settings, these gameplay elements all reinforce the tournament concept. A Mortal Kombat film that abandons this structure is like a Rocky movie without boxing matches or a racing film without races. It removes the very thing that defines the franchise. The first film's focus on Cole Young represented perhaps an even more fundamental mistake. In a franchise with dozens of iconic, beloved characters developed over 3 decades, creating an original protagonist suggests either ignorance of or contempt for the existing roster. While original characters can work in adaptations, Agent Smith in The Matrix games or the Guardians in the Destiny franchise, for example, they succeed when they add something the existing roster lacks or serve a specific narrative purpose that established characters can't fulfill. Cole Young did neither. His role as audience surrogate could have been filled by Johnny Cage, who serves that function in many game narratives, the outsider who discovers this mystical world and must prove himself worthy. His family drama could have been given to any number of characters with richer backstories and more interesting relationships. His special abilities were generic compared to the creative powers established characters possess. He wasn't filling a narrative gap, he was occupying space that could have been used for characters fans actually wanted to see. The question of whether Cole Young will return in the sequel is significant. His presence would suggest the filmmakers remain committed to this original creation despite fan backlash. His absence would indicate they've listened to criticism and shifted focus back to established characters. Early marketing emphasizing Johnny Cage, Katana, and other game characters while not prominently featuring Cole suggests he may be sidelined or eliminated entirely, which would be the correct creative decision. As mentioned, the sequel includes way more characters from the video games, who will all be fighting in an actual Mortal Kombat tournament. Slater claimed that these test screenings were full of Mortal Kombat fans, so clearly the fights, character interactions, and overall story of the sequel will be better received this time around, which bodes well for the future of the franchise. The expansion of the character roster addresses one of the first film's most frustrating limitations. Mortal Kombat's appeal lies partly in the variety of its fighters, each with distinctive designs, personalities, fighting styles, and special moves. The games allow players to explore this variety, finding characters that resonate with their personal preferences. Some players gravitate toward ninjas like Scorpion and Sub-Zero, others prefer the Special Forces soldiers like Sonya Blade and Jax, still others enjoy the cosmic entities like Raiden or the monstrous fighters like Baraka. A film that includes more characters provides similar opportunities for audience members to find favorites and enjoy the variety of matchups. Johnny Cage vs. Baraka offers completely different dynamics than Liu Kang vs. Shang Tsung. Katana's combat style with her razor-sharp fans creates different visual spectacle than Sub-Zero's ice-based attacks. The tournament structure allows the film to showcase this variety through different matches, each with its own character dynamics and fighting styles. The character interactions in a tournament setting also provide opportunities for the personality and relationship development that Mortal Kombat's best stories have always featured. Rivalries can be established and paid off. Alliances can form and be tested. Characters can have meaningful exchanges between fights that develop their motivations and relationships. The tournament isn't just a series of isolated fights, it's a framework for character drama and development. That hardcore Mortal Kombat fans are responding so positively to these elements in test screenings suggests the sequel has successfully captured what makes the franchise special. These fans know the characters intimately, understand the mythology deeply, and have specific expectations for how everything should look, sound, and feel. Pleasing this audience while also making the film accessible to newcomers is challenging, but achieving it would position the franchise for long-term success. Before the 2021 movie, only 2 other live-action Mortal Kombat films were made way back in the 90s. Just like the 2021 film, 1995's Mortal Kombat and 1997's Mortal Kombat Annihilation underwhelmed audiences. The 1995 movie adapts the story of the first game quite faithfully and has some fun moments, but is also very cheesy and feels like a fan film rather than a major Hollywood production at times. Meanwhile, Annihilation is widely regarded as a major disaster, which is obvious from its 4% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes via Rotten Tomatoes. The 1995 Mortal Kombat film holds a special place in my heart despite its obvious flaws. I was young when it was released, and seeing these characters I'd spent countless hours playing as brought to life on the big screen was thrilling regardless of the execution's quality. The film got certain things right. The casting of Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa as Shang Tsung was perfect, Christopher Lambert brought appropriate otherworldly energy to Raiden, and the theme song by the Immortals became an enduring classic that still gets played at fighting game tournaments today. However, watching the film as an adult reveals its significant limitations. The PG-13 rating fundamentally neutered what should have been Mortal Kombat's signature element, its extreme violence. The fatalities, which in the games were elaborate, shocking sequences of creative brutality, were either absent or watered down beyond recognition. This was Mortal Kombat without the combat, a franchise defined by pushing boundaries forced to pull its punches for a more family-friendly rating. The special effects, even accounting for mid-90s technology, were often embarrassingly cheap. Gore, the four-armed Shokan warrior who should have been an imposing monster, looked like an animatronic puppet that could barely move. Reptile's reveal as a literal reptile creature rather than a humanoid ninja was baffling and poorly executed. The locations, while attempting to capture the game's exotic arenas, often felt like obvious sets rather than lived-in places. The tone was perhaps the biggest issue. The film couldn't decide whether to take itself seriously or embrace camp, resulting in an uncomfortable middle ground that satisfied neither approach. Some actors played their roles straight while others seemed to be in on the joke, creating tonal inconsistency that undermined both the drama and the fun. The fights, while competently choreographed in places, lacked the impact and creativity that should define Mortal Kombat combat. Still, the 1995 film at least understood that it needed to include the tournament. The structure of the film follows the game's basic plot: fighters traveling to a mystical island to compete in Mortal Kombat, with Earthrealm's freedom at stake. This fundamental understanding of what the franchise is about gave the film a solid foundation, more sophisticated approaches to genre material. Mortal Kombat: Annihilation, on the other hand, is almost entirely without merit. Released just 2 years after the first film, it replaced most of the cast, slashed the budget, and delivered a product that feels more like a cheap straight-to-video sequel than a legitimate theatrical release. The special effects somehow look worse than the first film despite being made later. The plot is incomprehensible, cramming in dozens of characters and mythology elements without proper introduction or development. The action is poorly choreographed and shot, making it difficult to even appreciate whatever competent stunt work might exist underneath the presentation. The film currently holds a 4% critics score on Rotten Tomatoes, and even that seems generous. It's the kind of disaster that kills franchises, and indeed, there were no further live-action Mortal Kombat films for over 2 decades after Annihilation's release. The damage it did to the franchise's cinematic viability cannot be overstated. It confirmed Hollywood's worst prejudices about video game adaptations being inherently unworkable, and it created a stigma that the franchise had to overcome before another attempt could be made. Given this history, the bar for Best Mortal Kombat Movie Ever is admittedly not very high. The 2021 film, despite its significant flaws, was arguably already the best of the live-action efforts simply by virtue of having modern production values and a cast of talented performers. It looked like a real movie in a way the 90s films often didn't, and it featured moments of genuinely impressive action and visual effects. Its problems were creative decisions rather than budget limitations or technical incompetence. Mortal Kombat 2, based on everything we know about it, seems positioned to clear this low bar with room to spare. It has the budget for proper effects, the cast to bring characters to life effectively, the action choreography to deliver memorable fights, and most importantly, the creative understanding of what makes Mortal Kombat special. If it delivers on the promise suggested by test screening reactions and early critical buzz, it won't just be the best Mortal Kombat movie, it might be genuinely good regardless of franchise context. What makes me particularly optimistic is that the sequel seems to understand that being the best Mortal Kombat movie isn't enough. The film needs to stand alongside other quality action franchises, competing with the likes of John Wick, the MCU, and other major blockbusters for audience attention and critical respect. This requires not just understanding Mortal Kombat but also understanding what makes great action cinema work: clear fight choreography, characters worth caring about, stakes that matter, spectacle that dazzles, and a tone that balances seriousness with fun. The comparison to Avengers: Endgame is telling in this regard. Endgame worked because it delivered satisfying conclusions to character arcs audiences had been following for years, spectacular action sequences that showcased each hero's abilities, crowd-pleasing moments that rewarded longtime fans, and emotional beats that gave meaning to the spectacle. Mortal Kombat 2 needs to accomplish something similar within its own context, honoring the franchise's history while delivering an experience that works on its own terms. If the sequel succeeds, it could finally establish Mortal Kombat as a viable ongoing film franchise rather than a one-off curiosity or disappointing misfire. It could lead to additional sequels that explore different aspects of the mythology, expand the character roster, and build a cinematic universe that rivals what the games have created. It could prove that video game adaptations, when made by people who understand and respect the source material, can compete with any other blockbuster franchise. After decades of waiting, through multiple disappointing adaptations and false starts, I'm allowing myself to believe that Mortal Kombat 2 might finally be the film this franchise deserves. The tournament is happening, the characters are there, the fatalities will be properly brutal, the mythology will be respected, and most importantly, it seems to be made by people who understand why fans like me have loved this franchise for over 30 years. That understanding, more than any budget or special effect, is what's been missing from previous adaptations and what makes this sequel so promising. The wait for a truly great Mortal Kombat film has been long, but if the sequel delivers on its promise, it will have been worth it. This might finally be the adaptation I've been waiting my whole life to see, a film that captures the spirit, spectacle, and savage joy of Mortal Kombat in all its violent, mythological glory. And when that first tournament fight begins on the big screen, with the iconic voice announcing, "Fight!" and the action unfolding with the clarity and creativity the franchise demands, it will be a moment of vindication for every fan who believed this property could work in cinema if only someone would get it right. Mortal Kombat 2 has the opportunity to be more than just the best Mortal Kombat movie. It can be the definitive proof that when filmmakers respect their source material, understand their audience, and execute with skill and passion, video game adaptations can be just as compelling, entertaining, and successful as any other blockbuster franchise. The pieces are in place. The talent is assembled. The tournament awaits. All that remains is to see if the final product lives up to the promise, but for the first time in my decades as a Mortal Kombat fan, I genuinely believe it might.
There's a particular kind of nostalgia that video game adaptations trade in, a warm, fuzzy glow of familiarity that studios count on to paper over thin plotting and cheap spectacle. For decades, Mortal Kombat has been one of gaming's most recognizable and controversial franchises, built on a foundation of brutal combat, outlandish mythology, and a roster of iconic characters so deeply embedded in pop culture that even people who've never touched a controller can identify Scorpion's yellow ninja suit or Liu Kang's flying kick. The 1995 film adaptation became a cult classic, beloved not for its technical achievements but for its sheer, unabashed commitment to the campy, colorful spirit of its source material. The 2021 reboot tried to recapture that lightning in a bottle with mixed results, impressive action sequences undermined by clunky exposition and underdeveloped characters. Now comes Mortal Kombat 2, a direct continuation that sets its sights higher, swings harder, and lands somewhere in the complicated middle ground between genuinely entertaining blockbuster fun and a film that can't quite escape the gravitational pull of its own franchise obligations. It's louder, bloodier, and more ambitious than its predecessor. Whether that translates to a better movie depends almost entirely on how much you're willing to invest in one Johnny Cage, actor, fighter, reluctant hero, and the film's surprisingly beating heart. The setup, Earth is losing, and badly. The premise of Mortal Kombat 2 wastes no time getting down to business. The rules of the tournament are quickly re-established for those who might need a refresher. Mortal Kombat is an interdimensional fighting tournament governed by the Elder Gods, ancient, near-omnipotent beings who created the various realms of existence and now apparently spend their cosmic free time running what amounts to the universe's most dangerous sporting league. The rules are simple and brutal. Each fight is to the death. If one realm wins 10 consecutive tournaments against another, they earn the right to invade and conquer the losing dimension entirely. Earthrealm, our Earth, home to 8 billion oblivious human beings, has lost 9 tournaments in a row to Outworld, a savage, war-ravaged dimension ruled by the monstrous warlord Shao Kahn. 9 losses. 1 more and it's over. The skies darken, the portals open, and Shao Kahn's armies pour through. The film doesn't let you forget the stakes, returning to this countdown with almost anxious regularity, and to its credit, it works. There's genuine dramatic weight to the idea that the entire planet is one bad fight away from annihilation. Into this desperate situation steps our champion, Johnny Cage. Johnny Cage, the reluctant hero we didn't know we needed. If Mortal Kombat 2 has one genuine triumph, it is its central character. Johnny Cage is introduced not in the heat of battle or in a moment of glory, but in the sad, fluorescent-lit anonymity of a fan convention, sitting alone behind a folding table stacked with unsold DVDs and faded memorabilia, waiting for fans who mostly don't come. Once a martial arts champion and a prolific kung fu movie star, Johnny has faded into the kind of cultural irrelevance that's almost more painful than outright failure. He's not disgraced. He's just forgotten. And that particular brand of faded glory is depicted with a surprising amount of genuine melancholy. The film takes its time establishing who Johnny is before the supernatural ego he built it as armor against a world that told him he was nothing more than a pretty face with good kicks. We understand his loneliness. We understand why, when Raiden appears and tells him he's been chosen by the Elder Gods as a champion of Earthrealm, his first instinct is a combination of disbelief and desperate, wounded hope. For a man who has been told he no longer matters, being told he is cosmically essential is intoxicating and dangerous. What makes Johnny work as a protagonist is that the film never lets him off the hook emotionally. He is genuinely reluctant to risk his life. He makes jokes when he should be serious. He flinches at the violence in ways that feel human rather than cowardly. When Raiden tells him that he's not just fighting for himself but for Earth's 8 billion residents, you can see Johnny do the math in real time, the weight of that number settling on his shoulders like something physical. His eventual arc, from reluctant participant to a man who voluntarily steps forward for a near-suicidal mission, earns its emotional payoff precisely because the film has made us watch him struggle every step of the way. Raiden and the Elder Gods, divine intervention with fine print. Raiden, the embodied god of thunder, serves as Johnny's guide, recruiter, and occasional conscience throughout the film. The character walks a difficult tonal line. He needs to be authoritative enough to be taken seriously as a divine being, but accessible enough to function as a scene partner in what are often quite grounded emotional conversations. For the most part, the film threads this needle reasonably well. Raiden's exposition duties are handled with more grace than in many fantasy films of this type, largely because the screenplay wisely allows his scenes with Johnny to breathe as character moments rather than pure information dumps. The Elder Gods themselves remain largely off-screen, powerful, inscrutable presences whose influence is felt more than seen. This is a smart choice. The moment you put ancient cosmic deities on screen and give them dialogue, you risk deflating the mystery that makes them dramatically useful. What's more interesting is the film's willingness to complicate their moral standing. When one character states flatly that the Elder Gods have abandoned their creation, it lands with real weight, suggesting that the divine framework underpinning Mortal Kombat may be less benevolent than advertised. Are these gods truly protecting Earthrealm, or simply using it as a pawn in cosmic games they no longer particularly care about? The film raises the question without fully answering it, and the ambiguity serves the story well. There's also a quietly effective moment when someone describes a character as barely having a soul left to corrupt. In a film filled with supernatural elements, magic amulets, necromancy, hellish dimensions, it's the small, human-scaled spiritual observations that tend to cut deepest. Shao Kahn, the villain Earthrealm deserves. Every great tournament needs a great villain, and Mortal Kombat 2 gives us Shao Kahn in full, terrifying form. Where previous iterations of the character have sometimes tipped too far into cartoonish menace, this version finds a more compelling balance. Shao Kahn is absolutely brutal. The film makes no effort to soften his violence or his ambition, but he's also depicted as something more than a simple conqueror. He is a man or being who has turned systematic domination into a kind of philosophy. His desire to seize the magical amulet that would transform him into a true god isn't simply greed, it's the logical extension of a lifetime spent believing that strength is the only honest currency in the universe. His command of Outworld is depicted as genuine and iron-fisted. The loyalty of his forces isn't manufactured by charm but enforced by the certainty that opposition means death. His casual cruelty is established early and maintained consistently. When he tells a vanquished foe to give my regards to the devil, it doesn't read as a quip but as a sincere instruction from someone who is personally acquainted with the forces of darkness and entirely comfortable in their company. His supporting cast deserves mention here. The necromancer in his service, who revives undead warriors with unsettling efficiency, adds a genuinely creepy dimension to Outworld's arsenal. The idea that Shao Kahn's forces don't just defeat their enemies but conscript them into undead service after death speaks to a particular kind of violation that goes beyond mere conquest. It's a detail that gives Outworld a specific, nightmarish texture that distinguishes it from generic fantasy evil. Shao Kahn's consort also registers as a character of note, a woman who has clearly made calculated choices in a world defined by power, and whose allegiances carry more complexity than her initial presentation suggests. The film is careful not to reduce her to simple treachery or simple loyalty. The tournament, structured chaos. The actual fights of Mortal Kombat 2 are, of course, the main event, and the film delivers them with considerable kinetic energy and choreographic imagination. Each battle is staged as a distinct set piece with its own geography, rhythm, and emotional stakes. The film has clearly learned from the mistakes of action franchises that allow their fight sequences to blur together into undifferentiated noise. Here, each confrontation has a clear dramatic purpose beyond simply advancing the body count. Particularly effective are the battles that carry genuine emotional weight, fights between characters whose relationship extends beyond simple tournament rivalry, where the physical combat becomes a language for expressing things that can't be spoken. The film understands, at its best, that a fight scene is not an interruption of character development but a continuation of it by other means. The moments of mercy, when fighters choose to spare a defeated opponent rather than deliver the killing blow, are handled with appropriate gravity. These are not soft moments in a film of hard edges, they are instead the most quietly radical acts in a world that demands death as the price of victory. They say something about what separates Earthrealm's champions from Outworld's warriors that no amount of expository dialogue could communicate as efficiently. A young girl's father tells her during one of the film's quieter interludes that her true strength lies in her head and her heart rather than her physical power. It's the kind of line that could feel sentimental in a lesser film, but here it serves a genuine thematic function, articulating the philosophy that distinguishes Earth's champions from Shao Kahn's brute force ideology. The film returns to this idea repeatedly, in different forms, building it into something that feels like the movie's actual thesis. The violence, unflinching and then some. Let's be direct, Mortal Kombat 2 is an extraordinarily violent film. This is not a criticism. The Mortal Kombat franchise has always been defined by its willingness to depict combat in graphic, visceral terms, and the film would be a fundamental betrayal of its source material if it pulled its punches. But it is a fact that potential viewers should factor into their decisions, and it warrants a thorough accounting. The violence here goes well beyond the stylized, bloodless combat of most action blockbusters. The film depicts death with a specificity and physicality that is clearly intentional, designed not just to provide spectacle but to remind the audience that the stakes of this tournament are genuinely fatal. A surprising number of characters are impaled by bladed weapons, each instance rendered with a directness that refuses the comfortable abstraction of Hollywood violence. One warrior is bisected by a blade, a moment of such blunt finality that it stops the film cold for a moment, as it should. A giant hammer is used to devastating effect against another combatant, with results that are graphically depicted. A blast of energy punches clean through a character's body. A makeshift buzzsaw reduces another to nothing. A man is stabbed through the eye. These are not moments designed to be entertaining in the conventional sense. They are brutal, and they are meant to be. The film is making an argument through its violence, that the world of Mortal Kombat is one where consequences are absolute and death is real. When Raiden speaks of the gravity of what Earth's champions are risking, the film has already shown us, in explicit terms, what that risk looks like when it goes wrong. That said, there are moments where the violence tips into what feels more like spectacle for its own sake, the lingering shot of a character's bleeding finger stumps, for instance, or certain death scenes that go several beats past what dramatic purpose would seem to require. The film occasionally appears to be indulging its audience's appetite for gore rather than serving its story, and in those moments, the violence feels less like a meaningful choice and more like a franchise flexing its R-rating muscles. The end credits sequence, which offers visual recreations of some of the film's bloodiest moments, leans into this tendency with obvious enthusiasm. Whether you find this a fitting celebration of the film's gonzo energy or an unnecessary escalation is likely to depend on your appetite for this kind of material going in. The spiritual landscape, gods, devils, and the space between. One of the more interesting aspects of Mortal Kombat 2 is the seriousness with which it engages its own mythology. This is a film populated by gods, necromancers, hellish dimensions, magical amulets, and cosmic lotteries, a theological playground that could easily collapse into nonsense. Instead, the film treats its spiritual architecture with a consistency and internal logic that makes the world feel genuinely inhabited rather than arbitrarily constructed. Characters who travel there are changed by the experience. The film understands that if you're going to use the concept of damnation as a dramatic element, you need to treat it with some degree of weight. The necromancer's ability to revive the dead raises genuinely interesting questions that the film wisely doesn't fully answer. What does it mean to be brought back from death in service of someone who killed you? Is there a soul still present, or merely an animated shell? The film doesn't philosophize at length about these questions, but it acknowledges them, which is more than most action blockbusters would bother to do. Shao Kahn's pursuit of godhood through the magical amulet is handled as something more than simple power-seeking. There's a theological argument embedded in his ambition. If the elder gods who created the realms have, as one character claims, abandoned their creation, then perhaps the solution is not to wait for divine intervention but to become divine yourself. It's a villain's logic, certainly, but it's a coherent one, and the film is smart enough to let it breathe. The brief moment when a character crosses himself, a small, private gesture of Catholic faith in the middle of a battle against supernatural evil, is one of the film's most unexpectedly moving moments. In a film full of gods and demons made visible, that small, very human act of private prayer lands with surprising force. A glimpse inside the movie within the movie. Among the film's more playful touches is the brief scene was shown from one of Johnny Cage's in-universe films, an over-the-top action sequence featuring all the elements of the genre at its most exaggerated. hand-to-hand combat against multiple opponents, a villainous woman meeting her end, an exploding helicopter, and Johnny at the center of it all, young and vital and certain of his invincibility. It's a sequence that functions on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it's good fun, a loving parody of the kind of films the character is supposed to have made his name in. But it also serves as a quietly devastating character note. This is who Johnny was, or at least who he projected himself to be. The gap between that larger-than-life image and the sad reality of the fan convention booth is the emotional engine of the character. The sequence also invites an interesting meta-commentary about the film we're watching. Mortal Kombat 2 is, in a sense, a movie about a man who played heroes in movies discovering what it actually costs to be one. The Johnny Cage of the in-universe film never bleeds, never doubts, never sits alone at a booth waiting for fans who don't come. The Johnny Cage of Mortal Kombat 2 does all of these things, and ultimately becomes a better hero for it. What the film gets right. Mortal Kombat 2 succeeds most completely when it trusts its characters over its spectacle. The decision to anchor the film in Johnny Cage's perspective, to give us a protagonist who is genuinely uncertain, genuinely afraid, and genuinely human, gives the film an emotional coherence that its predecessor frequently lacked. We care about what happens to Earth not in the abstract but because we care about what happens to Johnny, and through him, to the people he's fighting alongside. The film's world building is confident and efficient. It doesn't over-explain its mythology, trusting the audience to follow along and fill in gaps through inference. The various realms feel genuinely distinct. Outworld is not simply a dark mirror of Earth but a fully realized civilization with its own history, politics, and internal tensions. The fighters who inhabit these worlds are, for the most part, more than their powers. They have motivations, histories, and relationships that extend beyond the tournament's kill or be killed framework. The mercy moments, quiet, revolutionary acts in a world that demands death, are handled with a restraint that makes them more powerful than any amount of spectacle. They're the film's clearest statement of what it believes distinguishes heroism from mere violence. What holds it back? The film stumbles in a few consistent places. The pacing in the second act loses momentum in stretches where the screenplay seems uncertain whether it wants to develop its ensemble characters or push toward the tournament's climax. Several supporting fighters are given interesting introductions but insufficient follow-through. We sense the outlines of compelling characters without getting enough of them to make the investment pay off. Some of the humor, particularly a recurring gag in which a male character's enthusiasm for Earth's pleasures devolves into a list of increasingly crude interests, feels calibrated for a younger, broader audience than the film's otherwise adult-oriented tone would suggest. It's a jarring tonal shift that happens several times and never quite finds a comfortable register. And while the CGI is largely impressive, there are moments, particularly in the larger-scale battle sequences, where the digital scenes show, and the weight and physicality of the combat is undercut by visuals that can't quite sell the reality of what they're depicting. In a film where the violence is meant to feel genuinely consequential, those moments of artificiality are more damaging than they would be in a lighter production.
It's worth pausing, before the first punch is thrown or the first head is pulverized, to ask a genuinely interesting question about Mortal Kombat 2, one that the film itself seems to be quietly wrestling with throughout its 116-minute runtime. Do moviegoers actually need a plot or sympathetic characters from a live-action adaptation of a fighting video game franchise? Does the audience that shows up for a Mortal Kombat film want emotional complexity, thematic depth, and meaningful character arcs? Or do they want exactly what the games have always delivered: spectacular violence, outrageous finishing moves, and just enough narrative scaffolding to justify the next round? The reason this question matters is that Mortal Kombat 2 appears genuinely uncertain about its own answer. At various points, it seems to be making a sincere effort to be a real film, one with characters who grow, relationships that develop, and themes that resonate beyond the arena. At other points, it abandons these ambitions entirely, retreating into the comfortable territory of fan service, pop culture quips, and choreographed brutality. The result is a movie that is, depending on which scene you're watching, surprisingly affecting or deeply mediocre, sometimes within the space of a single sequence. This tonal instability is the film's central failing and its central fascination. Mortal Kombat 2 is a film that can't quite decide what it wants to be, and that indecision costs it dearly. The franchise problem: 4 films and still searching. To understand Mortal Kombat 2, it helps to understand the franchise history it's inheriting. When the original Mortal Kombat arcade game was released in 1992, it didn't simply become popular, it became a cultural flashpoint. The game's use of digitized human figures and its grotesque, fatality, finishing moves generated a level of public controversy that directly contributed to the establishment of the Entertainment Software Rating Board. It was exhibitor in congressional hearings about violence in video games, a boogeyman for concerned parents, and a must-play secret for every kid who could find an arcade cabinet away from adult supervision. Even Ed Boon, who co-created the franchise and makes a cameo appearance in this film, has acknowledged that he wouldn't want his 10-year-old playing a game like Mortal Kombat. The franchise was built, from its very foundation, on transgression. The 1995 Paul W.S. Anderson film took that transgressive source material and, stripped of the gore by a PG-13 rating, produced something genuinely charming in its commitment to campy excess. It wasn't a good film by most critical standards, but it had a personality, an aesthetic, and a spirit of cheerful absurdism that made it enormously watchable. Its 1997 sequel, Mortal Kombat: Annihilation, was objectively worse in almost every technical respect. The effects were cheaper, the script more incoherent, the acting more variable, but it possessed a particular kind of delirious boldness. When Annihilation climaxed with a dragon fighting a hydra in an animality sequence that looked ridiculous and knew it, the film was at least daring to go somewhere. It looked silly, but it looked silly with conviction. The 2021 reboot tried to split the difference between these extremes, bringing back the gore, upgrading the effects budget, and making gestures toward character development and serialized storytelling. It was a partial success, the action was impressive, the violence appropriately extreme, but the characters were thin and the expository burden was crushing. Mortal Kombat 2 inherits these unresolved tensions and, for the most part, fails to resolve them. Boone probably wouldn't want his kid watching this movie, either, and the film earns that distinction with considerable enthusiasm. Johnny Cage and the limits of self-awareness. Karl Urban steps into the role of Johnny Cage with evident relish, and there are moments, enough of them to be genuinely frustrating, where you can see the outline of something special. Johnny as the washed-up action star conscripted into cosmic combat is, on paper, a brilliant premise. The gap between the heroic image he once projected on screen and the sad reality of convention booth obscurity is dramatically rich territory. When the film lets Urban simply be human, uncertain, bruised, reaching, the character works. The problem is that Mortal Kombat 2 can't resist the temptation to keep Johnny at ironic arm's length. He's more reliable as a delivery mechanism for elusive quips, Squid Game, Big Trouble in Little China, than as an emotional presence. The film clearly believes that this self-aware, pop-culture fluent persona is charming, and Urban delivers it skillfully enough that it often is. But charm deployed as a defensive mechanism, in both the character and the film, eventually becomes its own kind of limitation. If Johnny never fully drops the pose, we never fully invest in the stakes. His character arc is, as one character bluntly acknowledges in what amounts to the film telegraphing its own thinness, by the numbers. He's reluctant, he's recruited, he resists, he grows, he steps up. Sonya Blade tells him he could have been one of the best, a line that functions as both character motivation and screenplay shorthand, efficiently communicating what a more confident script might have dramatized rather than announced. Urban sells it better than it deserves to be sold, but the architecture is visible throughout. His highlight moment, a split followed by a punch to an opponent's groin, is executed with perfect comic timing and will, as predicted, circulate on social media indefinitely. Whether a film's most memorable moment being a genital punch represents a creative achievement or a creative failure is a philosophical question the film isn't equipped to answer. Raiden, Sonya, and the problem of sincerity. The film's supporting cast presents a consistent structural challenge. Raiden, the lightning god played by Tadanobu Asano, is given the thankless role of being the film's moral compass and primary exposition engine. He is, as described in the film itself, self-serious, and in a movie that keeps undercutting sincerity with irony, his commitment to earnestness occasionally makes him feel like he wandered in from a different production. Asano plays it straight with dignified commitment, but the screenplay doesn't always know what to do with a character who isn't in on the joke. Sonya Blade, played by Jessica McNamee, occupies the equally difficult position of painfully sincere ally, the character who believes in the mission without reservation and therefore serves mainly as a foil for Johnny's quippy deflection. The dynamic between them is functional but not particularly illuminating. We understand their relationship, but we don't feel it. The ensemble beyond these two is where the film's ambitions and its execution diverge most painfully. Several fighters are given backstories with genuine dramatic potential, histories of loss, betrayal, and longing that the film sketches with enough specificity to make you want more, and then receives nowhere near the screen time required to make those potential resonate. Katana and Jade, the case study in wasted potential. Nothing in Mortal Kombat 2 illustrates the screenplay's weaknesses more clearly than the handling of Katana and her relationship with Jade. Adeline Rudolph's Katana is introduced with exactly the right dramatic hook. We witness the brutal murder of her father by Shao Kahn in the film's opening sequence, establishing her vendetta with the economy and clarity of classic action storytelling. It's a strong opening that promises a revenge narrative of genuine emotional weight. That promise is not fulfilled. Katana's thirst for revenge, which should be the emotional spine of her arc, is treated as an afterthought, returned to periodically but never developed with the sustained attention it requires to generate real investment. The mechanics of her story are present, the feeling is largely absent. More damaging is the film's treatment of her relationship with Jade, played by Tati Gabrielle. Jade tells Katana that she thinks of her as a sister, a declaration that should be the foundation of the film's most emotionally resonant relationship. Instead, it functions primarily as setup for a later narrative development, after which Jade essentially gets lost in the film's increasingly crowded third act. The sisterhood we were invited to invest in evaporates without the weight of earned drama, leaving a hole in the film's emotional center. This is a pattern throughout Mortal Kombat 2, the promise of emotional investment without the follow-through. Characters are given just enough backstory to suggest depth, then shuttled aside by the plot's demands. It's the difference between a film that trusts its audience to care about people and a film that trusts spectacle to paper over the gaps. Kano and the comedy question. The return of Kano, a fan-favorite villain who, it must be noted, died in the previous film, raises immediate credibility questions that the screenplay cheerfully declines to address with any seriousness. Josh Lawson brings the same anarchic energy to the role that made him memorable in the reboot, and his pop culture riffs rock, M-Sock, M-Robots land with reasonable frequency. As comic relief goes, Lawson commits fully and earns most of his laughs. But the film also hands him what may be its single worst line, a moment where Kano, escorting an unconscious villain, announces his arrival by asking, "Somebody order a necromancer." It's a line that doesn't just fail to be funny, it actively punctures whatever atmosphere the scene was trying to establish. It's the kind of joke that belongs in a children's animated spin-off, and its presence in what is otherwise a film of extreme, adult-oriented violence creates a tonal dissonance that's almost physically uncomfortable. This is not Lawson's failure, it's the screenplay's. The film wants Kano to be simultaneously a source of irreverent humor and a genuine threat, and it hasn't figured out how to make those registers coexist. When the comedy works, it creates welcome relief from the film's relentless brutality. When it fails, as with the Necromancer line, it inadvertently reminds you of the Mortal Kombat animated series for younger children, a comparison the makers of this very R-rated film presumably did not intend to invite. The language, 50 shades of profanity. Any comprehensive assessment of Mortal Kombat 2 must reckon honestly with its language, which is extensive and frequently extreme. The film deploys the F-word more than 50 times, a frequency that goes well beyond functional emphasis into something that begins to feel like atmospheric wallpaper. When profanity is used this liberally, it loses its capacity to shock, emphasize, or characterize, it simply becomes the film's default register. The supporting profanity is similarly comprehensive. The S-word appears more than 25 times. God's name is misused on 3 occasions. The C-word makes an appearance. Additional profanity ranges across the available spectrum, supplemented by crude anatomical references and at least a couple of rude hand gestures. There's a version of this language usage that serves the film's gritty, combat-hardened world, a version where profanity functions as authentic character voice, as evidence of people under extreme stress speaking the way extreme stress actually produces. Mortal Kombat 2 reaches for this version and sometimes achieves it. But 50-plus uses of any single expletive tends to suggest habit rather than intention, and there are long stretches of the film where the language feels less like a creative choice and more like a franchise flexing its R rating. When Johnny responds to learning about Mortal Kombat and Earth's imminent destruction by announcing that he wants to drink every beer on the planet, it's one of the film's more genuinely funny lines, a perfectly calibrated comic response to an impossible situation. We subsequently see him drinking in a bar, another character joins in his appreciation for alcohol, and the film moves on. It's handled with relative lightness, but it's worth noting as part of the film's broader texture of adult-oriented content that, taken in aggregate, pushes well beyond what its action film genre typically requires. Present, it was never going to be absent from this franchise, but because of the specific relationship the film has with it. This is not a film that depicts violence reluctantly, as an unfortunate necessity of its genre. It is a film that depicts violence with enthusiasm, with craft, and with evident pride in its ability to outdo its predecessors. The gore here is rendered with a level of photorealistic detail that the games themselves, even in their most recent iterations, haven't quite achieved. Bodies are destroyed with a specificity and physicality that goes beyond spectacle into something that occasionally feels closer to documentation. The franchise was always defined by its fatalities, the ritualistic, over-the-top finishing moves that transform victory from triumph into statement. The film honors this tradition enthusiastically, delivering each major death with the kind of cinematic flourish that will satisfy fans of the games while leaving unprepared viewers significantly disturbed. What's interesting, and slightly troubling, is the film's relationship to its own violence. At its best, the gore functions as dramatic weight, a reminder that the stakes of this tournament are absolute and fatal, that the champions of Earthrealm are risking something real and irreversible. At its worst, it functions as audience reward, a payoff offered to viewers who have been patient through the film's less successful dramatic passages. The distinction matters because the first use treats violence as meaning, the second treats it as product. The film tips too frequently into the second category. The end credits sequence, replaying highlights of the film's most violent moments, is the clearest evidence of this tendency. It transforms the film's most extreme content from narrative elements into greatest hits, curated for maximum impact and implicit celebration. It's an unusual choice that will delight a certain audience and alienate another. The action sequences, technically impressive, occasionally generic. The fight choreography in Mortal Kombat 2 is, taken scene by scene, frequently impressive. The film has clearly invested in the quality of its physical combat, the sequences are well staged, well edited, and capture the distinctive fighting styles of the various characters with reasonable fidelity to the games. Urban and his stunt doubles handle Johnny's combination of martial arts technique and showmanship with particular effectiveness. The climactic sequence, 3 separate battle threads running simultaneously, is technically accomplished but emotionally flat. The interweaving of multiple fights is handled with competent editing, but none of the 3 threads carries sufficient emotional investment to make the parallel structure feel like genuine tension rather than logistical complexity. We are watching impressive choreography. We are not, for the most part, watching scenes we deeply care about. The CGI-heavy set pieces are more variable. Some look expensive and detailed, others are woefully generic, video game environments that look exactly like video game environments, missing the specific, inhabitable texture that distinguishes a world from a backdrop. There's a particular disappointment here for fans of the original 1995 film, whose production design, for all its budgetary limitations, created genuinely distinctive spaces. The acid motes and ominous thunderstorms of the original Mortal Kombat mythology feel, in this new film, like window dressing for effects showreels rather than places with history and weight. The dialogue problem, generic at both extremes. One of the film's most consistent weaknesses is its dialogue, which tends to fail whether it's aiming for wit or sincerity. The quippy characters, Johnny, Karl, are frequently amusing but rarely land a line that sticks beyond the scene. The earnest characters, Raiden, Sonya, are often reduced to delivering motivational speeches and expository summaries that, while competently written, don't reveal characters so much as communicate information. The catchphrase moment, one fighter yelling, "Get over here," before executing a signature move, is inevitable, expected, and handled with reasonable efficiency. It will please fans. It will also remind everyone watching that the film is, at some fundamental level, an exercise in delivering contractual obligations to its source material. Whether that acknowledgement diminishes or enriches the moment depends on how generously you're inclined to view franchise service as a creative act. What the film gets right, and why it matters. It would be unfair, in the midst of this catalogue of failures and half-measures, to deny Mortal Kombat 2 its genuine accomplishments. The film is, in certain meaningful ways, exactly what it promises to be, a faithful, technically accomplished, R-rated adaptation of a beloved franchise that delivers the violence, the characters, and the mythology that the game's fans have been waiting decades to see rendered with this level of craft and budget. The messages embedded in the film's better moments are worth acknowledging. The theme of self-sacrifice, heroes placing their lives between earth and destruction, not for glory but because the alternative is unthinkable, is handled with intermittent but genuine conviction. The idea that strength lies in character rather than capacity, that mercy can be more powerful than the killing blow, that a washed-up actor might discover he was worth something all along, these are not cynical ideas. They are earnest ones, handled with varying degrees of skill but present throughout, giving the film more moral texture than its surface suggests. And Karl Urban, to return to where we began, is doing something more interesting in this film than the screenplay quite deserves. In his quieter moments, he is playing a man discovering that the roles he played on screen were a kind of practice for something real, and that the gap between performance and authenticity, which he has been using to protect himself for years, is the thing that has to die before he can become who he needs to be. It's a genuinely affecting arc, rendered in fragments rather than fully, but present enough to elevate the film above what its weaker elements would otherwise produce. Final verdict: better fan service, smaller ambitions. Mortal Kombat 2 has more technically accomplished action, a bigger budget, and more crowd-pleasing highlights than the deliriously unhinged Mortal Kombat, Annihilation, and yet, paradoxically, it feels like the lesser achievement. Annihilation at least dared to look foolish. It swung for the fences with a Dragon vs. Hydra climax that was objectively terrible and completely unforgettable. It had conviction in its own absurdity. Mortal Kombat 2 is too hip to be sincere and too hacky to be genuinely moving. It keeps its irony as a shield against the mockery that sincerity might invite, and in doing so, it forecloses the very emotional impact that would make it memorable. It delivers better fan service than its predecessors while offering less of what makes films actually matter. For the specific audience it's targeting, fans of the games, devotees of extreme action cinema, viewers who simply want to watch impressive choreography and spectacular gore, it largely delivers. The fights are good. The violence is thorough. The mythology is honored. Ed Boon gets his cameo. Get Over Here gets its moment. For everyone else, the violence is genuinely extreme, the language is relentless, and the emotional rewards on offer are modest relative to the content you'll have to navigate to reach them. Discerning viewers might reasonably choose to let this particular tournament play out without them. Mortal Kombat 2 is a film that knows exactly what it is. The only question is whether what it is happens to be what you're looking for.